I am here with Dilshan Benaragama. He is the Assistant Professor, Department of Plant Science at University of Manitoba, also the Crop Protection Chair in Weed Management. Dilshan, we're out here today because we're looking at some of the new tools when it comes to weed management, one of them being drones. So what are some of the advantages that can be coming with drones when it comes to crop protection products and dealing with weeds in fields?
Yes, thank you, Greg, first for having me for this interview and to talk about the stuff we are doing in the research farm here in Carman, as well as generally in the Department of Plant Science. So what we are doing with drones is basically to see how we can integrate the technology that is all talking about, like digital agriculture, AI, drones, sensors, remote sensing, satellites. So you might have heard this term. So what we are trying to do here is to understand what we can do with this technology and whether we can develop new ways to do weed management, integrating those technologies. That's kind of basically what we're doing.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really caught my attention when we were speaking earlier. It was the integration of technology and agriculture in weed management. So drones as being one of the more rather interesting and things that people are looking at in terms of weed management. What are some of the advantages of using a drone when it comes to weed protection or crop protection in weed management? Should they become, I guess, legalized in Canada in the near future?
Yeah, the first thing is there are two basic things we can do with drones. That is, one is remote sensing world, that is surveying things, right? Looking at what's happening in your field. So we talk about Western Canada, we have thousands of acres, like 4,000, 5,000 of hectares or acres in a farm, typical farm. Pretty large to deal with, right? And the farmers day to day have to do scouting and to see where the problems are in terms of diseases, pests or weeds, to identify where the problem area. So that is a big challenge. So typically they have to drive around and see where the problems are. But the drones really getting handy because when you fly a drone over your fields, you can cover entire farm in a quick time and then look into each and every specific spot in your farm. That is called surveying. So that is one of the biggest advantage drones gives us in terms of weed management perspective or disease management perspective or general crop protection. The second thing is, at the same time, those similar type of drones or more advanced version of drones can be used to apply the crop protection products like herbicides, pesticides, fungicides. So that is coming soon as well. So there are two big advantages that we can use with drones here.
Okay. I think one of the things you mentioned as well was green on green technology that comes to drones, because sometimes typical application equipment can't get into the fields where a drone maybe can. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, exactly. So what we are doing in our research program in the department is that first thing is we have to detect the problem area. So weeds in a crop, both are green, as you mentioned, green on green problem. How we detect those? So if it's just a crop, it's easy to understand, it's only crop. But when the weeds are lying underneath the crop or competing with the crop together, it's difficult to understand, figure out where are the weeds and where the crop is. So that's where the AI technology or machine learning technologies comes in. So we are using to integrate that to develop computer vision technologies. So when you take an image from a drone, then combining with AI technology, we can exactly see where the weeds are and then understand where the maps, develop the maps from them, and then use these crop protection products or whatever the methods we use to apply to do weed control can be done based on those maps. So that's kind of the advantage we have in terms of green on green technology.
Yeah, when it comes to the research level, of course, University of Manitoba, you're trying to identify, I guess, best practices when it comes to using this type of technology in the field. I can think of one story, or I spoke to somebody recently where a fungicide hadn't been applied properly just due to maybe some inexperience, and their corn yields took quite a hit when it came to the end of the year. How do you see this information of best practices getting down to the farmer level, so when the times come for them to use these types of technologies that it can benefit them and they won't maybe have those difficulties?
Yeah, it's a good point here, Greg. The problem is this is a new technology, particularly spraying with drones like these big ones. So we are all new to this technology, including farmers, scientists, and all the agronomists. Oh, we don't know how these things really work. So that's how we had to figure out. But the thing is, we have to figure it out by doing it, right? So we have to give a start and understand the problems. Yeah, as you mentioned, there are the misses, there are the problems with yields. We will not get the control we want because there are a lot of parameters coming in. When you're spraying a chemical through a drone, compared to spraying a chemical through a ground rig or like a ground-based sprayer. So the dynamics and everything is highly vary. So that's a problem we have always, how to understand the dynamics, the spray dynamics, the aerodynamics, how these things works. We are working on that, so we have to understand, and there are a lot of parameters to understand. That's what we are doing in research.
Right.
And even it's not legalized yet in Canada to use this product. We need to be there ready when it comes to legalize, and we understand how these things works. Then we can give a good kind of guidelines for farmers how to use this technology in an effective way, rather than spraying haphazardly without knowing the technology.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, of course, typical spray equipment uses nozzles delivery, whereas a drone is using an atomizer, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so that in itself will be some education that goes into that as well.
Yeah.
So one thing I've learned, Dilshan, about drones is they're only as effective as the field map that is provided to them. Tell me a little bit how that works. And generally, you have a smaller drone that goes up to kind of determine a field so that information can be delivered to a large drone to do its spraying. How does that work?
Yeah, that's the key thing. We have to understand what exactly we are doing with drones. So first thing is we have to understand the problem that is flying over large areas, mapping it using a very smaller drone. Like there are different type of drones. We have different sizes of drones here in our lab as well. So we can fly it and map it first and understand where the weed patches are and upload that areas that we highlighted or a map that we developed to a big drone like this. So it flies only to where the locations are identified and sprayed rather than covering all the land. So that is the most effective way of doing it. That is typical workflow of precision agriculture, I would say.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we are developing better tools to go in hand with these technologies, using more data-driven approaches rather than just not looking at just weeds where they are, but to understand whether those weeds are really going to impact much. So that's where our research projects come in. Myself and Dr. Rob Goulden are working on a big NSERC project. We're developing these kind of decision-making tools where we map the weeds, understand how much influence they can cause for yield in the future, right, prediction ability, and then develop a map based on yield loss, actual yield loss of the weeds. So then we don't have to just go and spray when they are appearing. Instead of doing that, we make a decision tool that, okay, these weeds are going to cause this much of yield loss, you should have to spray. Or these weeds are too small, they're not going to interfere with your crop, you don't have to spray. So that kind of decision-making tools, that's what we are developing in our department at the moment. Yeah.
Dilshan, I'd be remiss without asking you while you're here, what do you feel are some of the most challenging weed issues that are facing Manitoba farmers, and where technology can kind of help, that we have here today can help with that?
Yeah, it's a very important question at this point, because as we talk at the moment, the biggest problems we have in the prairies, or globally I would say, is the weeds are developing resistance to most of the important chemicals. For instance, even glyphosate, glufosinate-like chemicals, now they're showing a lot of resistance. It's showing up for other products, so many other products as well. So farmers are losing their best weed management tools. It's a big problem at the moment. And that's where, again, that's where my perspective is coming in terms of weed management is we can get this technology to address some of these big problems. And the weeds types can be different from each provinces or each areas. For Manitoba, it can be kochia, wild oat, maybe green foxtails like species. And if you go to Saskatchewan or Alberta, maybe kochia is a more bigger problem. It's different, but the common approach is we should reduce the use of herbicides as much as possible and try to integrate with different technologies. So digital tools, digital agriculture can really help that way. What I think is that when we identify these weeds are escaping herbicides that are typically they have been controlled, we can map those patches in large farms, and then we can do some precision weed management, sending these drones or something like that, and thereby we can reduce the weed seed production, weed escapes. So that way we make sure the next generation of herbicide resistance are not going through the development process. So that way I think the digital tools has less kind of utilized for that purpose. But what we are doing right now is to develop that kind of technology here. So that's kind of one of the project here also what we are doing, plan to do in this season is also how to understand weed escapes after herbicide application, and then send the drone and do some more precise control using different products. So that's where I think I'm really optimistic about this technologies where that we can address those problems.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dilshan, for meeting me out here today and telling me about your work. Pleasure meeting you.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.
Take care.
Take care.